It was a quiet afternoon when Harold Walker set out for his daily walk in the woods near his home in rural South Florida. He had always loved the serenity of the forest, the rustling leaves, the chirping birds, the occasional glimpse of wildlife. Nature had a way of restoring Harold, of making life's troubles melt away, even if only for a while. But on this day, nature would deliver him something far different, something Harold would never forget. The trail was overgrown in spots thanks to recent rains, but Harold didn't mind. He liked the challenge of maneuvering around fallen branches or wading through muddy sections. Wildlife was no stranger to these woods. Harold had seen everything from armadillos to raccoons, but as he stepped closer to investigate, he wasn't prepared for what he would find. But on this day, nature would deliver him something far different, something Harold would never forget. Emerging from the brush were three monitor lizards, large, muscular reptiles with long tails and sharp claws. At first, Harold thought little of it. The lizards were fascinating to look at, their leathery bodies gleaming under the sunlight. Monitor lizards weren't native to the area, but over the years, exotic pets had been released into the wild and caused populations to grow. Harold had heard about them occasionally showing up in the region. He wasn't alarmed. He had no reason to be, until they began moving toward him. Monitor lizards can grow up to 7 feet in length, and these particular individuals were formidable. Harold noticed their black, beady eyes fixed on him, and suddenly his chest tightened. Were they curious or were they hunting? His instincts screamed for him to step back, but his feet felt rooted to the spot. One of the lizards hissed loudly, its sharp tongue flickering. Harold was no herpetologist, but he instantly recognized this as a warning sign. Slowly, Harold backed away. His hands trembled as he gripped the straps of his backpack. He knew panicking would only make the situation worse. But as he took another step, his foot slipped on a slick patch of mud, throwing him off balance. He fell hard onto his side, and before he could scramble to his feet, one of the lizards charged. Its claws dug into his arm, ripping through his shirt and into his skin. A searing pain shot through him as he let out a cry, but it was drowned out by the fierce hissing of the other two lizards. They, too, advanced, as if emboldened by the first attack. Harold tried to push the lizard away, but its strength shocked him. He'd never imagined a reptile could be so powerful. Its jaws snapped inches from his face, and he reached desperately for a nearby stick. Swinging with all the force he could muster, he managed to knock the lizard back, but the victory was short-lived. Another lizard lunged, clawing at his leg. Harold screamed again, the agony almost blinding him. With his limited knowledge of monitor lizards, Harold knew one thing for certain: their bites and scratches carried bacteria. The longer the wounds remained untreated, the higher the risk of infection. He had to escape, and fast. The chaos of the attack seemed to stretch endlessly, though it was only minutes. Harold fought desperately to keep the lizards at bay, swinging the stick wildly while trying to edge backward toward the trail. Blood coated his arm and leg, dripping onto the ground with every movement. His breaths came in ragged gasps, the effort of defending himself taking its toll. Finally, as if sensing his dwindling strength, one of the lizards lunged directly at his chest. Harold threw himself sideways, narrowly avoiding its snapping jaws, and seized a heavy rock from the ground. With every ounce of strength he had left, he hurled it at the lizard's head. The impact sent the creature stumbling back, and its companions paused, giving Harold the opening he needed. He scrambled to his feet and ran, ignoring the screaming pain in his leg. Behind him, the lizards pursued for several meters before stopping, as if relenting now that their territory was clear. Harold staggered down the trail, his vision blurred by tears and sweat. His home wasn't far, but every step felt like an eternity. Eventually, the small wooden fence marking the edge of his property came into view, and he let out a sob of relief. By the time he reached his front door, he was barely conscious. A neighbor heard his cries for help and called an ambulance. Harold was rushed to the emergency room, where doctors cleaned and treated his wounds. Luckily, none of the lizard's bites had broken bone, but his injuries were severe: a deep gash on his arm, puncture wounds on his leg, and claw marks across his chest. The doctors warned him about the risk of severe infection due to the bacteria commonly found in monitor lizards' saliva. Harold would need extensive treatment, including antibiotics and wound care, to ensure his recovery. As Harold lay in the hospital bed that evening, he replayed the attack in his mind. How could something like this happen? Monitor lizards, while predatory, weren't typically aggressive toward humans. Had he unknowingly entered their territory or threatened their nest? He couldn't shake the image of those cold, unrelenting eyes, nor the sound of their hissing and claws scraping against the ground. Wildlife experts later visited the area to investigate, confirming that the lizards were indeed Asian water monitors, likely released by irresponsible exotic pet owners. While Harold's encounter was exceedingly rare, it highlighted a growing problem: invasive species disrupting ecosystems and posing risks to human populations. Monitor lizards, being opportunistic and territorial, could become aggressive in unfamiliar environments, especially when they felt threatened or cornered. The attack made headlines, and Harold's story became a sobering, cautionary tale. He received messages of support from strangers and learned about similar incidents involving exotic animals, proof that he was not alone in his experience. It also sparked a conversation about stricter regulations for owning and releasing exotic pets. Weeks later, after undergoing rehab and regaining some mobility, Harold returned to his home near the woods. The thought of walking the trails again made his stomach turn, but he refused to let the fear define him. Armed with new knowledge about local wildlife and carrying a pocket-sized canister of pepper spray, he ventured out cautiously. As he walked, the familiar rustling of leaves greeted him, though he found himself looking around anxiously whenever he heard movement. For Harold, the forest was no longer the peaceful retreat it had once been. But despite everything, it still carried a certain beauty, a reminder of nature's power and unpredictability. The attack might have changed him, but it had also made him stronger. He would never forget the day he faced 3 ferocious monitor lizards and lived to tell the tale.